Dear colleagues, we continue the briefings in the USCMC, and we have Dmytro Shymkiv, who is Deputy Head of the Administration of the President, and he'll tell you about the results of the work of the Ukrainian Investment Summit. Good afternoon. Forgive me my voice, but this is the result of the weather. I'm glad to see you again after 2 weeks. I have visited the Adam Smith Conference, the 9th international conference, the Ukrainian Investment Summit, where we had a lot of meetings with investors, with investment funds, with lawyers who accompanied different contracts. And there also were meetings with banking institutions. Excuse me. I think that meetings were interesting, and Ukraine is still on the radar screen of all the investors. They monitor the course of changes in Ukraine. Everybody was welcoming the creation of the absolutely new team in Ukraine, as we have the absolutely new government with young faces, with people of other experience, the experience of the business. We also have the new parliament, where there's a pro-European majority, and there are new people working in the president's administration as well, and this creates an absolutely new team that leads to the optimism among investors as far as the future of Ukraine is concerned. Everybody understands that our economic situation is complicated, and the way out of it won't be too fast, but the expectations of Ukraine are high, and as a positive result, I would like to quote a few examples. All the officials who attended this summit speak English. This had not happened before. This probably is not a huge victory, but believe me, when you talk to representatives of the investment milieu, this has an outstanding significance. Besides, I had a meeting with British MPs who last Wednesday discussed the situation around Ukraine. This is important because, regrettably, the Russian propaganda is also present in Western media. They have a very powerful system of spreading not always true information, or the information that can be distorted. So our presence and our presentations and the explanation of the situation and detailed discussions about reforms, all this really gives an opportunity to talk about the new Ukraine. I also had a meeting with the Ukrainian students who study in Oxford and London School of Economics, and we talked for an hour about how the young generation can change the Ukrainian state, Ukraine. I'm pleased that one of the girls who attended the meeting has written an email to me and said that she's interested in coming back to Ukraine and taking part in reforming the education in Ukraine. This is important because we badly need young people now who have a world outlook, a global outlook. So if there are any questions, I'll be pleased to tell you in more detail about the meetings. About the strategic initiatives that we are working on, we plan the session of the National Council for Reforms next week. This week, the decree on the composition of this council has to be passed, and during the first fully fledged session of this council, we plan to approve the strategy 2020 and reconsider the situation about strategic directions like court reform, fight against corruption, deregulation, and the system of state state administration. I'd like to tell that the previous team of the cabinet of ministers, headed by the former Vice Prime Minister Groisman, who is now head of the parliament, the plan of reforms 2015 has been completed. Over 300 experts have worked on it. Experts from the ministers, representatives of the European community under the leadership of Mr. Balash. And also, I think these are rather serious documents that signify the major indexes for the development of our economy, and this was passed on to the premier and to the president so that they could use it in their further work. And this is one of the elements of the preparation for the investment conference that will happen next year. We know that the coalition agreement became a basis for the action plan of the government. We have to talk about this, especially when we talk to international community and explain all the steps that we have to undertake as far as the vision of the government is concerned. I want to emphasize that today as never we have to be a joint single team, both within the country and outside of the country, because any arguments that we make public as a rule are used by our enemies. The laws on some reforms, there is a demand from the World Bank about the changes of the auditing commission, auditing chamber, and it will be soon tabled to the parliament. There are some changes in the law, like the selection for positions, the number of people working there, also external audit. As I told you, the National Council for Reforms will hold its session next week. Besides, I would like to share about the interaction with the public. On the site Reforms UA, we have had positive reaction to and proposals on many of our elaborations, especially 32 proposals as far as the law on the guaranteeing deposits from individuals are concerned. Many proposals concerning the deregulation and development of production, about the registration of individuals who are entrepreneurs, and the important question also is the purification of the power, or called lustration in common speech. The process has started in the administration of the president about the checking, or rather the fulfillment of the demands of the legislation as far as the head of the administration is concerned, also heads of the regional and district state administrations, and in the public domain there is an information about electronic declarations of incomes from those officials. Very soon we'll establish a new chapter about the lustration, and you will be able to find information there which is now dispersed across the site. And this will pertain to everyone, every official who are subject to checks within the within this subject matter of the law on illustration. Any questions?
Interfax Ukraine, Igor Solvay. Could you please tell us whether you have enough time to enter the law on civil service to the parliament this year, and about the tender on 3G? As for the law on civil service, we have a scheduled discussion of the bill, despite the fact that the next week in the Parliament will be devoted to the budget legislation, and we expect the law on civil service to be entered to Parliament in January next week. As for the 3G tender,
Зараз
decision was made by the National Committee on Communications, and all the documentation has to be ready by February 12th, and by the end of February, the full package of documentation will be available on the National Committee on Communications website, and I do not expect there will be any delays with this issue. Well, I have a question. Mr. Edward Lucas, in his interview to BBC, his senior economist, his editor-in-chief in The Economist, he made a statement
що відбувається в Україні, чи
that in the West there is insufficient understanding about what's going on in Ukraine. How did you feel the mood of investors, and whether Ukraine may account for sufficient or considerable investments next year? We should not expect that early next year a huge amount of investments will come to Ukraine on the one side. On the other side, we should keep in mind that despite the situation, the investment projects in Ukraine are in the pipeline, and they are being implemented. These are EBRD projects, the World Bank projects, and one more aspect is that all the those who participated in our delegation representing Ukraine in the investment forum, the objective was to keep Ukraine on the radar screens of European investors, and in order to attract attention of investors and allow them to keep on with their due diligence, with thinking about investments to Ukraine. There is an expectation that reforms will be implemented. On the other hand, we introduced new sectoral teams, new faces in Ukrainian authorities. We also introduced new government officials from the National Bank, from presidential administration, and explained about our top priorities, about our intentions and agenda, and presented our vision of Ukraine's development in the context of the global economy. And I believe that based on this, investors who look at Ukraine in the context of global investors, the investments, they will see Ukraine differently. We were thinking how to attract attention of investors and to attract their investments to Ukraine. And sometimes living here, we believe that everything what's going on in Ukraine, especially positive things, immediately become known to the investors globally. But that's not true, and that's why, despite these hard times, Ukraine has potential and has a bright future, both in terms of political, economic, and social dimensions, and without without being present in the global information space and in global fora, we will give this space to Russian propaganda. Quite often we can read pessimistic forecasts and predictions, but yesterday Morgan Stanley published their predictions for Ukraine, and actually their analysis is rather optimistic in terms of strategic finance, and that is, we should look for potential investors, creditors, and this could not be done within one day, but this is the approach was demonstrated by all those governmental officials who represented Ukraine in London. Whether you've got impression after meetings with investors, what is their deadline for Ukraine to implement reforms? Investors have full understanding that reform outputs will start from the first steps. That is, they want to see our first steps, like passage of deregulation legislation, anti-corruption bureau, which has to be established by the end of January, and they expect that some steps will be made in direction of judiciary reform. Many investors, especially those working in a variety of markets, they understand that it's not easy to introduce the rule of law and to change judiciary, but they want to see first steps. When we have got new government and new parliament, they expected that the laws should be passed quickly, while during the last months we did not manage to pass the new law on judiciary, and actually we are lacking this pace. Speaking to the journalists in foreign TV channels, I understood that they lack information about those new people who came to power in Ukraine, willing to change Ukraine. Thank you very much, and we will be happy to see you in 2 weeks before the new year. Thank you.